Have you ever felt the pull of the wild, the irresistible urge to lose yourself in the vastness of nature? I have. For years, the mountains were my sanctuary, my place of solace. But what happens when that sanctuary turns on you? When the beauty you seek hides something else? This isn't fiction. This is my story. A true account of a hike that began like any other, but quickly descended into something inexplicable, something terrifying, something that continues to haunt my waking hours. If you're ready to hear a real-life horror story that will make you think twice about your next hike, then make sure you stick around. And if you're a fan of true, unsettling narratives like this, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and hit that notification bell. The morning of the hike was perfect, a clear, crisp autumn day. The forest canopy was ablaze with reds, oranges, and yellows, creating a breathtaking spectacle. The air was invigorating, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I remember feeling utterly content as I set off, the only sound my own footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. I had packed my usual gear, plenty of water, energy bars, a first aid kit, and a detailed map and compass, though I'd hiked this trail a few times before and knew it well. For the first hour or so, the hike was exactly as I'd anticipated, peaceful and rejuvenating. I stopped a couple of times to admire the views, taking photographs of the stunning scenery. It was perhaps around mid-morning when I first noticed something that felt off. I was passing through a particularly dense section of the forest where the sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy. The usual sounds of the woods, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, seemed to have gone completely silent. It was an unnerving stillness, an absence of sound that felt unnatural, almost heavy. I paused, listening intently, but there was nothing, just absolute silence. I told myself it was probably just a temporary lull, a natural cycle within the forest. But a faint disquiet had begun to settle in the back of my mind, a subtle dissonance in what had otherwise been a harmonious experience. As I continued deeper into the woods, that unsettling silence persisted. It wasn't just the absence of birdsong. It was as if all natural sounds had been muted, creating a strange vacuum. Then I noticed something else. Along the edge of the trail, I started seeing small piles of stones, neatly stacked, almost like cairns, but far too numerous and too close together to be trail markers. They were unlike anything I had ever seen on a hiking path. At first, I paid them little mind, attributing them to some quirky hiker with an odd habit. But as I walked further, the number of these stone piles increased dramatically. They lined both sides of the trail, some just 2 or 3 stones high, others reaching almost a foot. There was a strange uniformity to them, a deliberate arrangement that felt intentional. It wasn't random. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was still just someone's unusual hobby, but the sheer volume of these carefully constructed piles began to feel less whimsical and more significant. I pulled out my map, double-checking my location, making sure I hadn't somehow strayed onto an unmarked path. But according to the map, I was exactly where I should be, on the well-maintained Whispering Pines Trail. The feeling of disorientation began subtly. I had hiked this loop several times, yet the bends in the trail seemed unfamiliar. The landmarks I expected to see were absent. It was as if the landscape itself had subtly rearranged. I started checking my compass more frequently, wanting to ensure I was still heading in the right direction. The compass seemed to be functioning correctly, consistently pointing north, but the terrain around me didn't quite align with my memory of the path. It was a disconcerting feeling, like being in a dream where familiar places have an unsettling twist. Then came the sounds. The complete silence had eventually broken, but it had been replaced by something far more disturbing. It started as a faint rustling in the undergrowth, just at the edge of my hearing. I initially thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer or a squirrel, but the sound was persistent, following me, matching my pace, yet I never saw anything. It was like something was moving just out of sight, always just beyond my peripheral vision. The rustling would stop when I stopped and start again as soon as I continued walking. My heart began to beat faster. I called out a few times, my voice echoing eerily in the still air, but there was no response, only the continued unseen movement in the woods beside me. The sun, which had been bright earlier, now seemed to be obscured by a thin, high cloud cover, casting the forest in a diffused, almost gray light. Every shadow seemed to lengthen and deepen, taking on indistinct, unsettling shapes. That rustling started to feel less like a curious animal and more like observation. There was a rhythm to it, a consistency that was deeply unsettling. It would stop when I stopped to drink water or consult my map, and then resume the moment I started moving again. It felt purposeful. I started scanning the trees, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was making the sound, but the dense foliage offered no clear view. There were moments when I could almost convince myself it was just the wind, though the leaves in the higher branches remained still. Then I noticed something else, something that sent a shiver of genuine fear down my spine. On the ground, just off the edge of the trail, I saw a freshly broken twig. It was clear the break was recent. The wood inside was still light-colored, and it was pointing in the direction I was heading. It was such a small thing, easily dismissed, but in the context of everything else that had been happening, the silence, the strange stone piles, the feeling of being followed, it felt like a sign, a marker. I quickened my pace, a sense of urgency now pushing me forward. I wanted to get out of this section of the woods, to reach a more open area where I could see my surroundings more clearly. But the feeling of being watched intensified. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, an unseen gaze fixed on me, and it was growing stronger with every step I took. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, the temperature dropping noticeably, even though the physical effort of hiking should have kept me warm. Then I saw it. Partially hidden behind a thick oak tree, there was something that looked wrong. It was a figure, vaguely human-shaped, but too still, too awkwardly positioned to be another hiker taking a break. It was leaning against the trunk at an unnatural angle, and as I cautiously moved for a better look, it seemed to melt back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me, if the stress was starting to affect my vision. I stopped and stared at the spot where I had seen the figure, but there was nothing there. The trees were still, the shadows unchanged. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a strange configuration of branches that my mind had interpreted as a person. But the fleeting glimpse had been too clear, too distinct. The unease that had been simmering beneath the surface now began to boil into a full-fledged dread. I started to hurry my pace, wanting to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever that was. My thoughts began to race. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, to find a logical explanation, but my mind kept returning to the unsettling stillness, the unnatural posture of that figure. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves now sounded amplified, potentially the sound of whatever I had glimpsed following me. The solitude I had once cherished now felt oppressive, isolating me with this growing fear. I started talking to myself, muttering reassurances, trying to maintain a semblance of control. But my voice sounded weak and unconvincing even to my own ears. The familiar comfort I usually found in the predictability of nature had completely evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of the unknown, of something unseen and potentially malevolent present in the woods. My focus narrowed, every sense hyper-alert, searching for any further sign, any confirmation of the threat I now instinctively felt. The joy of the hike was long gone, replaced by a singular, desperate urge to get out. Just as I thought I might be reaching a more open area, I came to an abrupt halt. The trail ahead was completely blocked by a massive pile of fallen trees and thick branches. It looked as if someone had deliberately created a barrier, a formidable obstacle that stretched across the entire width of the path and several feet high. It wasn't the kind of natural tree fall you sometimes encounter. The way the branches were interwoven, the sheer volume of the debris, it felt constructed. My heart sank. Going around it through the dense undergrowth looked difficult and time-consuming, and the thought of being further away from the marked trail, deeper in the woods, filled me with dread. A wave of frustration and a growing sense of being manipulated washed over me. This couldn't be a coincidence. The unsettling feeling intensified, solidifying into a terrifying certainty. Whatever was happening here wasn't random. Panic began to set in. I scrambled to try and climb over the tangled mess of trees, but the branches were sharp and unstable. The thought of being trapped here, alone and with that unseen presence, spurred me on with a surge of adrenaline. As I finally managed to pull myself over the last of the debris, I ran as if my life depended on it, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I didn't dare to look back, focusing only on the path ahead, desperate to put distance between myself and that thing. The sounds of pursuit were relentless, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always there, a constant reminder of the danger. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knees and hands, but I scrambled back to my feet, driven by sheer terror. The trees blurred around me as I ran, the once beautiful forest now a menacing labyrinth. I knew I couldn't keep this pace for long, but the thought of what would happen if it caught me fueled my desperate flight. Eventually, the relentless pursuit seemed to fade, though I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. My body was screaming in protest, my legs heavy and aching, my lungs burning with each gasping breath. I had no idea how long I had been running or how far I had gone. The trail, which had been so familiar, now felt alien and hostile. Every turn brought a fresh wave of anxiety. The fear that I would see that figure again, standing silently in my path. I kept pushing myself forward, driven by a primal need to get away from that place, to reach the edge of the woods, to find safety. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around me like mocking figures. The thought of being caught in the woods after dark filled me with a fresh wave of panic. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trying to ignore the pain and the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to me like a shroud. Finally, through the dense trees, I saw a break in the foliage, a hint of something more structured than the wild woods. I stumbled forward, my legs barely able to support me, and emerged onto a gravel path close to what looked like the entrance of the hiking area. I could see a small building in the distance, and with a surge of desperate energy, I started to stumble towards it. My vision was blurry, my breathing ragged, and I could barely stay on my feet. Just as I thought I might collapse, I saw someone approaching me, a figure in uniform, possibly a park ranger or a security guard. He looked surprised and concerned as he saw my state. The next few moments were a blur. The guardsman, he introduced himself as Ranger David, rushed towards me, his expression one of concern. I tried to explain what had happened, my words coming out in disjointed gasps. He helped me to a nearby bench and gave me some water. I recounted the unsettling silence, the strange stone piles, the feeling of being watched, and finally, the terrifying figure I had encountered in the woods. Ranger David listened intently, his brow furrowed. He called for assistance on his radio, describing my condition and my story. While we waited, he asked me more questions, trying to piece together what might have occurred. There was a mixture of concern and skepticism in his eyes, but he took my account seriously. The authorities were notified, and a search of the area was conducted, though unsurprisingly, no evidence of the figure I saw was ever found. Ranger David mentioned that there had been occasional, unconfirmed reports of strange occurrences on the trail over the years, but nothing quite like what I described. The experience left a lasting impact. While I was grateful to have been found and helped, the questions lingered. What did I see out there? What was following me? Was it real, or was it a manifestation of my fear and exhaustion? I still don't have the answers. Have any of you ever had an experience in the wilderness that defied explanation and left you with more questions than answers? Share your stories in the comments below. If you found this account chilling and want to hear more true stories of the unexplained, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. Perhaps if enough of us share our experiences, we can begin to understand the darker side of the places we think we know so well. Be careful out there. I've gone back and forth about whether I should even share this story. For a long time, I convinced myself that talking about it would only make it more real, that it was better left in the back of my mind, like a dream that didn't belong in the daylight. But the truth is, I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake, and I remember everything. This happened in 2019. I was 28. I'd just taken a leave from work, was dealing with the fallout of a breakup, and had this idea in my head that the mountains could somehow offer clarity, a reset button of sorts. So I went hiking alone. Just me, a pack, and a trail I had researched for weeks. It wasn't reckless. I had maps, food, a sat phone. I'd done solo treks before. But something about this trip, this place, was different, and I felt it almost immediately. From the very first night out there, something was off. Nothing obvious, nothing you could point a flashlight at, but like a low-grade tension humming under the surface, it never really left me. And by the time I realized how deep I was in, how far from help, I think it already had me. I wasn't followed. Not at first. It was subtler than that. Things misplaced. Sounds that didn't belong. Hours that slipped by without memory. I told myself it was exhaustion or stress, or even altitude. But deep down, I think I already knew I was being watched. What happened on that trail, what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt, still keeps me up at night. And the worst part is, I'm not sure anyone would believe me. even if I laid out every detail. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try. I'm telling this now because someone else might be planning the same trip I took. Same route, same confidence, same blind spot. And if even one person hears this and thinks twice, maybe it'll be worth reliving. This is my story, the disturbing truth about what happened to me in the mountains. Take it however you want. Just don't say I didn't warn you. I started planning the trip in late March. The route was in the northern Rockies, not a tourist-heavy area. Rugged, largely untouched, and rarely trafficked outside of midsummer. That was part of the draw. I didn't want a crowded trail. I didn't want small talk with other hikers. I wanted time to think, to unplug from everything, the noise, the screens, the obligations. I studied the map like it was a blueprint to some better version of myself. 5 days out, 2 days back in a loop, mostly alpine forest, a few steep ridges, and one logging road that cut through the old growth. That road had been closed for years. No vehicles, just foot travel. I logged my itinerary with the local ranger station, told a friend when I'd be back. Packed light but smart, weather gear, water filters, bear spray, a sidearm I'd never had to use before. I felt ready. On the first day, the air was crisp, clean. Every step felt like distance from the person I was back home, a version of myself I wasn't in any hurry to return to. The forest was thick but beautiful. Tall evergreens swallowed the sound. There were moments of total silence, so complete it felt unnatural, like the air itself was listening. I told myself I was just not used to real quiet anymore. That silence is what nature sounds like when you stop filling it with your own voice. By the second night, I'd made camp near a creek. The stars were out, and I could hear the water running nearby, one of those rare moments that actually lives up to the idea of peace. But at some point in the night, I woke up. No reason, no sound. Just open eyes at 2:30 a.m., staring at the roof of my tent. My heart was racing. I told myself it was nothing, just a dream I couldn't remember. I lay there for almost an hour, listening. Nothing moved, no wind, no animals. The forest was still. Too still. That's when I remembered what one of the rangers had told me, in kind of an offhand way, that the trail had seen a drop in traffic the last couple years, not because of wildlife or weather, just people avoiding it. When I asked why, he paused for a second too long. Then he just shrugged and said, "Some folks get spooked out there. You know how stories are." I laughed it off then. I didn't think much of it. But I've thought about that moment a lot since. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his voice trailed off when he said, "stories." I don't think he was just making conversation. I broke camp early that morning. Sunlight was cutting through the treetops in long columns. Everything looked the way it should. Calm, normal, but something had shifted. I couldn't name it at first. I just remember packing up slower than usual, checking my gear more than I needed to, looking over my shoulder, even though I hadn't seen another person in days. It started small. About a mile in, I noticed a cut in the trail, faint, like someone had taken a different path. It veered sharply left and led downhill, off the mapped route. I stopped and stared at it for a while. Part of me was curious, but something told me to keep moving. I didn't detour. I kept to my plan, but even as I walked away from it, I kept glancing back, and I couldn't shake this thought. I hadn't seen that fork the day before, not once. The trail grew steeper that day, a lot of switchbacks. My legs were burning by noon. I paused at a ridge to drink some water and check my GPS. That's when I realized something was off. The GPS showed me almost half a mile east of where I should have been. I double-checked the map. I hadn't left the trail, but my position didn't make sense. I thought maybe the satellite signal was bouncing off the rock face nearby, causing drift. That happens. But it nagged at me. By early afternoon, the forest had changed. The trees were taller here, older. The canopy blocked out most of the light. It got colder, fast. I stopped to put on a jacket, and that's when I noticed my water bladder had leaked. The seal must have cracked. Most of my drinking water, gone. I had purifying tablets, but I'd planned to fill up at a marked stream that should have been nearby. I backtracked a bit, but I couldn't find it. Just more trees, more quiet. Then I heard something. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, like wood tapping on wood. 3 short knocks, then silence. I froze, waited. Nothing. I told myself it could have been a branch falling, or maybe a woodpecker. But it didn't sit right. I'd spent enough time in the woods to know the rhythm of natural sounds. This felt timed. I moved on, faster now. I told myself I'd make camp early, get some rest. I reached a clearing around 4:30, made a fire, ate the last of my packed food. No sign of wildlife, no bird song, just that same pressing stillness. But it wasn't quiet that night. Just past midnight, I woke up again. I was cold. Colder than I should have been with the gear I had. My breath fogged in the tent. And then I heard it again. 3 knocks, same pace, same distance. Then a pause. Then 2 knocks, closer. I sat up, completely still. My hand was already on the zipper of the tent, but I didn't open it. I didn't want to. I didn't want to see what was out there. The fire had long gone out. There was no light, no moon, just pitch black forest. I don't know how long I sat like that. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe 2 hours. Eventually, I must have passed out from sheer exhaustion. And when I woke up, the sun was already rising. Nothing was out of place, except one thing. About 30 feet from my tent was a small pile of stones, perfectly stacked. 3 at the base, 2 above, 1 on top. I hadn't seen them the night before. I hadn't stacked them. I didn't eat breakfast that morning. I packed everything in under 5 minutes and kept walking. I didn't even bother brushing my teeth. Something had changed. I didn't know what I was in anymore. I didn't stop walking. That entire morning, I didn't take a single break. I didn't look at the scenery. I barely even drank water. I just kept moving. I told myself it was fine, that it was probably just local kids messing around, that the knocks were nothing, that the stacked stones could have been there all along and I'd just missed them in the fading light. But I knew I was lying to myself. Every now and then I'd turn around, not for any reason, no sound, no movement, just a feeling, that low-level awareness you get when you're being watched. By noon, my legs were shaking. I wasn't following the trail anymore. I was cutting through, trying to make a straight line back to a known fire road I'd marked on my map before the trip. It was risky, but I couldn't spend another night out there. Around 2 p.m., I found something that stopped me cold. There was a sock, an old hiking sock, snagged on a branch just above eye level, not mine, worn thin at the heel, with what looked like faded blood at the toe. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it, and then I noticed something else. The brush near the sock had been parted, not trampled, not torn, parted, like someone had deliberately cleared a small path through it. I followed it for about 50 feet before I stopped. The forest opened into a kind of shallow basin, wide, maybe 40 yards across. Dead silent. In the center of it, there was a tarp. Faded blue, tied down with stones and branches. From where I stood, it didn't look like it had been used in a while, but it was there, hidden, covered up. I don't know what I expected to find underneath. I didn't touch it. I didn't even move closer. I just backed out the way I came and kept walking. From that point on, the forest felt tighter, closer, like every tree had inched just a little toward me when I wasn't looking. And then, around 5 p.m., I found the first carving. It was on a tree just off to the right of where I was walking. Simple lines, angular, too uniform to be natural, almost like symbols, but none I recognized. They weren't fresh, but they weren't weathered either. And what unsettled me more, a second one appeared just 20 minutes later, carved low, right at eye level. Then a third, then a fourth, each one different, each one closer together than the last. I wasn't lost. I had a compass. I knew my direction, but it started to feel like the woods were folding in, bringing me back to the same place, like the landmarks were repeating. The same fallen log, the same leaning tree, over and over. Dusk came fast, faster than it should have. I didn't want to stop, but I had no choice. I pitched my tent hastily under a shelf of rock. No fire, no cooking. Just sat in the dark, counting the minutes until sunrise. That night, I heard breathing. Not mine. Outside the tent, slow, controlled, not moving, just there. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't make a sound. I didn't sleep, not a single second. By the time the first light cracked through the tent fabric, I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped the tent in a single motion, ready to run if I had to. There was nothing there. But again, just like before, something had been left. 3 parallel claw marks on the outside of the tent. Not torn through, just deep enough to be unmistakable. Something was following me. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. I didn't know what it was. But it wanted me to know it was there. Morning didn't bring relief. It brought confusion. I'd marked my path the night before. Small rock piles every couple 100 feet. Nothing elaborate, just enough to guide me back if I needed to retrace my steps. But when I stepped out of the tent, they were gone. Every single one. There was no wind, no animal prints, no signs of rain, just nothing. It was like I had imagined them, like the forest had simply erased them. I tried to keep moving. My compass still worked, but everything else felt wrong. Distances were off, slopes where there hadn't been any, streams that ran uphill. I started to doubt myself. I began checking my map every 15 minutes, but the landmarks didn't match. Not even close. Elevations were off, clearings where none should be. And then I saw the same sock again. The same torn fabric, same blood at the toe, same snag on the branch. I wasn't circling. I was being circled. I turned to run, but I didn't get far. The air hit me like a wall. Cold, heavier than it should have been. I remember hearing a sound, not a growl, not footsteps, more like the absence of everything else, a void dragging everything around it inward. That's when I dropped my pack. Everything, food, gear, camera. I didn't care. I had to move. I ran until I couldn't feel my legs. I ran until the trees blurred and the breath in my chest felt more like smoke than air. When I finally stopped, I was in a part of the forest I didn't recognize at all. No trail, no canopy, just silence, thick, pressing, endless. I started talking out loud at that point, to myself, asking questions I didn't want the answers to. Are you still here? What do you want? Why me? There was no answer, but I knew it heard me, because a few minutes later I found my name, carved into a tree trunk, deep, clean, centered, my name, first and last. That was it. That's what broke me. I don't remember how long I sat there. I don't remember how long I cried. I just remember realizing, finally, that I might never leave those woods. At some point, maybe hours later, I heard running water. A stream, small but real. I followed it. Stumbling, falling, I didn't care. It meant life. It meant direction. It meant I wasn't trapped in some infinite loop of trees and lies. Eventually, the stream crossed a man-made path, old, overgrown, but wide enough for tire tracks. It was real. I followed it until the sun went down. I didn't sleep. I kept walking in the dark, whispering my name out loud over and over again, like it was a charm to keep me tethered to something sane. And then, around 2 a.m., I saw headlights. A truck, parked, no one inside, but there was a map in the windshield. That's how I found the fire road. That's how I found my way out. But the thing is, I never saw another person. Not once. I followed that fire road for hours. It wasn't on any of my maps. The terrain didn't match anything I'd studied, but I didn't care. I just kept moving. At some point, I lost track of time. The sky never got darker. Just stayed in that limbo between dusk and full night. No stars, no moon, just a hollow gray above the trees, like something was pressing down on the forest, keeping everything stuck. I remember stumbling, catching myself on a tree. That's when I noticed something odd. There were scratches, long ones, deep into the bark, like claws, 3 of them, perfectly spaced, too precise to be natural, too high for a bear, too low for anything flying. I didn't stop to think, I just kept walking. I saw the ranger station at sunrise, or at least, I thought it was sunrise. The station was empty, no power, dust everywhere, like it hadn't been used in years. But there was a phone, an old rotary kind, yellowed and brittle. I lifted the receiver, not expecting anything, but it clicked. Then a voice came on. It didn't say hello. It didn't identify itself, just said, "You're almost there. Keep going." The line went dead. I dropped the phone and ran. About 30 minutes later, I hit asphalt, a 2-lane road. I stood there for a while, just staring. It felt too easy, like I was being allowed to leave. A Forest Service vehicle picked me up an hour later. The guy driving said I was 11 miles from where I'd entered. He asked what happened. I told him I got turned around, lost the trail. He nodded slowly, didn't press, but as he helped me into the truck, he muttered something I'll never forget. "You're lucky. Most don't come back the same. Some don't come back at all." When I got home, I tried to make sense of what happened. Tried to write it all down, draw maps, track my steps, but nothing added up. The ranger station I found, it burned down 12 years ago. Phone lines were never repaired. The fire road, it doesn't exist on any current or archived forestry maps, not even satellite. The tree with my name carved into it? I went back 6 months later with a small group of friends and GPS gear. We couldn't find it. Couldn't even get to the same clearing. Everything had changed. I checked my compass from that trip. Still have it. The needle spins in place now. Never settles, no matter where I am. The nightmares started a few weeks after I got back. always the same, walking alone in the dark, something watching, just out of frame. I wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. But the worst part? Sometimes I hear the forest, in real life, in traffic, at the store, in my own backyard. That same breathless silence, that sense that something's just off, like a thread that never got cut, like I never really left. I've never told this part to anyone before, not in full. Not even to the few people who believe something really happened out there. I've been asked, why go hiking alone? Why that place? Why at that time of year? All fair questions, I guess. But the truth is, I don't really know what I was looking for. Maybe I thought I needed to prove something to myself, that I could endure the silence, that I was still strong, still capable of handling the wilderness on my own terms. But there are things in this world that don't care how strong you think you are. Places that were never meant to be trespassed. Moments that are meant to go unremembered. I've gone over every step I took, replayed the sounds, the trees, the shadows, the heat, all of it. I've had experts tell me it could have been a fugue state, that I might have hallucinated from dehydration or stress. But none of that explains the compass, or the photos that vanished from my SD card without deleting, or the part I haven't mentioned yet. There was a second voice. The first was mine. The recordings I made on my phone were me talking through the fear, trying to stay sane. But when I played them back after I got home, there was something else, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. It would answer some of the things I said. It stopped after a few days. The audio files wouldn't play anymore, just static. I sent one to a friend of mine who works in digital forensics. He told me the metadata was corrupted in ways he'd never seen. Timestamp anomalies, untraceable echo layers, almost like something had been inserted. He joked that it was probably just some weird interference, but he wouldn't take another look after that. He changed the subject anytime I brought it up. I still hike, but never alone. Never without telling people exactly where I'm going, and never in that region again. Sometimes I'll come across something in the woods that makes me stop. A tree bent in a direction it shouldn't be. A pile of stones that looks too deliberate. And I'll think, what if it followed me out? What if it's not a place you find, but a place that finds you? I've thought about reaching out to others, people online, forums, anonymous groups. Sometimes I'll find someone who had a story that feels adjacent, similar in the wrong ways. They'll say things like, the woods changed shape, or I heard my own voice but I hadn't spoken. Some of them stop posting, accounts disappear, threads get deleted. Maybe they moved on, maybe they didn't. There's a reason I'm recording this now. Quietly, late at night, alone in my office. This isn't for views. It's not to scare anyone. I think it's more like a record, something to leave behind in case I ever forget again. Or worse, remember something I wasn't supposed to. People want a clean ending, a villain, a twist. But I don't have that. All I have is this feeling I can't shake. That something let me go. And that whatever it wasn't finished. I don't think it ever is. This is what really happened on that trail. And if you think it couldn't happen to you, think again. Some places don't need permission to change you. You just have to step in. And sometimes, stepping out isn't enough to leave it behind. In 2019, I went hiking alone in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. I was 34. I'd done solo treks for years, quiet, remote stretches of land that most people never set foot on. Those places always felt like home to me. My job was stressful, my city loud, and the trail was where my thoughts finally had room to stretch out. No deadlines, no reception, just the sound of my boots on the dirt and the wind threading through the trees. The route I chose wasn't popular. That's partly why I picked it. It intersected with parts of the Continental Divide Trail but veered into areas only marked by cairns and a faded topographic map I'd printed weeks before. The plan was 4 nights out. I had all the gear. I left my itinerary with a friend. I followed the process. Nothing about it should have gone wrong. The first day was everything I wanted it to be. Long miles, cold air, a high ridgeline with nothing but open land on either side. I set up camp near an alpine lake, cooked dehydrated chili, and listened to the birds quiet down as the sun slipped behind the trees. I remember lying in my tent thinking, this is what I needed. That first night I slept deeply. No disturbances, no wildlife, just silence. But looking back, that's the part that unsettles me the most. The silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the feeling that the woods were holding their breath, that something else was waiting for me to fall asleep. You rationalize things like that when you're alone in the wilderness, but some part of you knows, even if you can't name it yet. I've told this story a few times since then, usually in pieces, usually after a few drinks, and even then, I can tell most people think I'm exaggerating, or worse, making it up. I'm not. I've kept the GPS coordinates, the audio recording, even a few photos I took before things got strange. This isn't a ghost story. This isn't a campfire tale. I'm not here to scare you. I just want to put down exactly what happened, the way I remember it, so that maybe, if something like this has happened to someone else, they'll finally speak up too. Because there are things in the wild, things no one puts on park maps or brochures, and if you find them, if they notice you, they don't always let you leave the same way you came. I grew up in northern Arizona, small town, red dirt, big sky. My dad was a mechanic. My mom taught 3rd grade. And from the time I was 10, I spent more weekends in the woods than I did at home. My older brother taught me how to follow a trail without markers, how to tell if a stream had clean water, how to walk quiet enough that deer wouldn't bolt when I came around the bend. He passed when I was 20. Sudden, unfair. After that, being outdoors stopped being just a hobby. It became a way to stay connected. To him, to silence, to something that didn't feel temporary. When I say I'm a hiker, I don't mean it like a weekend photo op. I've crossed parts of Montana with just a pack and a compass. I've winter camped in Utah, bushwhacked through parts of Wyoming that felt untouched for decades. I've had gear fail, weather turn, sprained an ankle 12 miles out, and crawled 2 of them before help arrived. You don't forget those kinds of trips. They teach you something different than comfort. They show you what you can handle, what you should avoid, what matters when it all gets stripped away. So when I planned that solo hike in the San Juans, it wasn't reckless. I had an emergency beacon. I had extra batteries. I left digital breadcrumbs, text messages, notes, trail markers. I didn't go in blind. I'd done the route on paper, measured elevations, double-checked water sources, even scanned the satellite imagery to anticipate camp zones. Some people overestimate nature. Some underestimate it. I don't. I respect it. That's why I still don't understand what happened out there. This wasn't like the time I got caught in a thunderstorm above the tree line. It wasn't dehydration. It wasn't a mountain lion or a bear or some guy messing around in the woods. I know what those things look like. I know what they feel like. This was different. From the beginning, it felt like something was watching, not in a paranoid way, but in a patient one. Like something had time, like it had all the time it needed. And I know how that sounds. I know it's easy to hear that and think I'm trying to embellish a quiet hike into something dramatic. But I wasn't scared when I started. That came later. When the trees stopped moving. When the markers I passed didn't match the map. When the air got too still for weather. When the woods stopped behaving the way woods should. I started the hike on a Tuesday. Late September. Cold enough to see your breath in the morning. Warm enough to shed layers by mid-afternoon. That first morning was smooth. Trail was well cut. The ascent steady but not punishing. I passed one older couple heading down as I came up. They smiled, asked how many days I was doing. I told them 4. The woman's expression shifted, just for a second. Something between concern and hesitation. But her husband cut in and said, "You picked a good time. Quiet out here this week." And then they were gone. That small look the woman gave me, I brushed it off. Maybe she was just tired. Or maybe she thought I looked unprepared. People make assumptions about solo hikers. They either think you're overconfident or running from something. But I wasn't running. I was trying to clear my head. Around mile 6, the main trail started to break up. I crossed a dry riverbed that wasn't dry on the topo map. A small thing. Rivers move. Still, it caught my attention. About a half-mile later, I saw something carved into a tree. Not initials, just a shape. 2 small X's stacked on each other, like a crooked hourglass. The bark was darker around it. Seemed older than recent, but not ancient. I took a photo. Thought maybe it was a trail marker from a long-abandoned route. By the time I set up camp that night, I'd hiked just under 11 miles. The location was almost perfect. Flat, close to a stream, wind-blocked on 2 sides by rock walls. I made a small fire, wrote in my trail log, and recorded a short audio memo on my phone. I do that sometimes instead of journaling. Less effort when your hands are cold. Day 1, I said into the mic. Made good time. No wildlife. Ran into 2 hikers early on. Nothing since. Cold's manageable. 1 weird trail carving. Maybe Forest Service. Worth checking later. Everything else, normal. I paused after that. I remember that clearly. I paused, then added, "Still, something feels off. Nothing major, just stillness. Can't explain it. Might just be being alone again." That night, I woke up once, around 2:40 a.m. No sounds, which is rare. Usually you hear something, wind, branches, mice, owls, but it was dead quiet. I unzipped the tent slowly and stuck my head out. The moon was bright enough to see by. No movement, no breeze, just cold. And then I heard it, 3 sharp clicks, like something tapping 2 stones together. Not fast, not loud, just deliberate. I turned toward the sound, but it stopped. Waited about 5 minutes, then zipped the tent back up. Told myself it was probably falling ice or a distant echo, but I didn't fall asleep for a while. Next morning I checked the area. No sign of animal tracks, no disturbed rocks. The stream nearby hadn't shifted. The trees looked the same. Still. It was the first time on a solo hike I remember starting my day with my knife already in my jacket pocket. The 3rd day was when everything shifted. It started innocently enough, with a climb. It was a steady incline, not too steep. I left my camp early, around 6 a.m., with the goal of reaching a ridge by mid-afternoon. The higher I got, the more isolated the trail became. The trees, thinner. The air, colder. I'd been hiking for hours without seeing a single person, which in itself didn't seem strange at first. This was a remote area, but the feeling of it, that strange pressure that had been building in the back of my mind, it started to settle around me like fog. At the top of the ridge, I stopped to take a breath. I took a swig of water and looked out across the valley below, the landscape unfolding like a map. The silence up there was almost unbearable. It was the kind of quiet that makes you question your own hearing. So I did what any solo hiker does in that moment. I pulled out the camera, took a few pictures, one of me standing near the rocks with the peaks in the background. And then I heard it. A rustling, a faint crackle, like dry leaves crunching, but coming from somewhere below, behind me. It wasn't natural. It didn't fit. The wind hadn't kicked up, not even a whisper through the pines. I turned around expecting to see a squirrel or some animal pushing through the brush, but there was nothing, just the slope descending into a thick patch of aspen trees. I stood there for a minute listening. Nothing, no birds, no insects, no movement. Then I shrugged it off. Maybe it was just an odd echo, or my mind playing tricks on me. It happens, especially when you've been hiking alone for days. Your senses get sharper, or maybe duller. But as I started to move down the trail again, I noticed something strange. The trail had changed, subtly. The rocks I'd passed earlier, the ones that should have been sharp and angular, now had worn edges. There were small piles of brush that had been carefully stacked, almost as if they'd been placed there. I stopped and crouched to examine them. They weren't random, scattered by wind or weather. It looked intentional, a deliberate placement. But who would do that out here, this far off the main routes? I checked the map again. This wasn't the way the trail should have gone. The old route was supposed to veer to the left, following the ridgeline. But this trail, this path, it bent. It was as if someone or something had altered it. Without thinking, I started following it. At first, just to see where it led. I didn't realize I was making a mistake until I'd already gone too far. As the trail wound deeper into the trees, the air grew colder again. The sun, which had been out moments ago, seemed to get lost behind a haze. I felt the change before I saw it. A sudden drop in temperature, an oppressive weight in the air. My breath came out in visible puffs. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked my watch. Midday. But it didn't feel like it. It was as though the sun had been muted, like the light was struggling to break through something dense, something unseen. I pressed on, but each step felt heavier. The trail had become a winding mess of undergrowth, and the trees around me were denser, more tightly packed. Then, without warning, the feeling hit me. That distinct sense that I wasn't alone. Not in the usual, you're a little paranoid way. This was different. This was like something was moving with me, keeping just out of sight. It wasn't the rustling of animals. It was like footsteps, slow, deliberate, matching my pace. I stopped, but the sound didn't stop. It kept moving, just a beat behind me. I turned around, half expecting to see someone. But again, nothing. Nothing at all. And then I saw it. A shape in the distance, behind the trees. For a moment, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But as I stared, it didn't move the way it should have. It was a figure, but not a person. No arms, no face, just the silhouette of a form standing completely still. My heart stopped. My stomach dropped. The hairs on my neck stood up. I blinked, once, twice, and the figure was gone, vanished, like it had never been there. I'm telling you this because I still don't know how to explain it. I don't have a word for it. The way the air felt colder all of a sudden, the way the shape just stood there motionless, and then nothing, not a sound, not a trace. But that moment, right there, was when I first realized I might not be alone out here, not in the way I thought. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring at where the figure had been. Time felt warped. The only thing I could hear was my heartbeat in my ears, a muffled thrum against the quiet. I shook my head, trying to clear it. It's just fatigue, I told myself. Just your mind playing tricks. I turned away, determined to get back on track, get out of there. But the trail, it had changed again. It was no longer the path I recognized. The ground was softer, spongier. The trees loomed taller, the branches crowded in. There was a feeling that the forest had subtly, insidiously shifted around me, folding in on itself. I tried retracing my steps. I pulled out the map again. The landmarks I'd passed earlier seemed wrong, distant, like they were fading out of view the further I moved. I couldn't even find the carving I'd taken a photo of 2 days ago. In its place, a different tree, a different shape. Something was wrong. I wasn't on the same trail anymore, I was sure of it. I had been careful with my compass, careful with every decision. But now, I couldn't trust the map. I couldn't trust my instincts. I checked my watch again. An hour had passed since I'd last checked. 1 hour of wandering, unsure of where I was going. It felt like a nightmare. Not a horror movie kind of nightmare, but the slow burn kind that settles in your chest. The kind where every decision you make seems to lead you deeper into a place you can't escape from. I was lost. Not lost in a way that can be fixed by a simple course correction. I was lost in a place that wasn't supposed to exist. I pulled out my emergency beacon. It was a precaution, something I always carry. But as I clicked the button to send a distress signal, there was no response. No flashing light, no confirmation beep, just a dead silence. I clicked it again and again, but nothing. I don't know what it was, battery failure, malfunction, or something else. But the beacon didn't work. That's when I realized the isolation wasn't just physical, it was total. I'd been prepared for this. I'd hiked remote places before, places where things can go wrong, where help is hours away, sometimes days. But there was something different here, something that wasn't supposed to happen. The air, the trees, the ground beneath me, they were changing. I was being boxed in, slowly, methodically, like the forest had a mind of its own. And then the footsteps returned, soft, slow, almost deliberate. Not behind me this time, but ahead of me. I stopped, my breath coming out in sharp gasps. My legs felt weak, my muscles twitching. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to turn around. But I had no choice. Slowly, I took a step forward. But as I turned to run, the air seemed to press in from all sides, thick, oppressive. I ran, or I tried to. I pushed myself through the underbrush, feeling the sting of branches and twigs slapping against my face. I ran until I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. But then something strange happened. I stopped feeling like I was in control. It was as if my body had stopped following my commands. The more I ran, the further I seemed to be from where I'd started. Every time I thought I recognized a trail marker, it disappeared when I looked again. Every time I thought I was near a ridge, it turned out to be a hollow. I couldn't get out. I stumbled into a clearing at one point, gasping for air, desperate. And that's when I saw it. The trees around the edge of the clearing, they weren't trees at all. At least, not in the way I understood trees. They were twisted, gnarled, unnatural. Their trunks had taken on shapes, almost like they were reaching toward me, like they had been shaped by something unseen. And then, in the middle of the clearing, there was a pile of rocks, carefully stacked. It didn't make sense. Why would someone leave rocks in the middle of nowhere like this? The pile wasn't a cairn, it wasn't a marker for a trail, it was a symbol. And as I stared at it, I heard something, soft, muffled, a voice. No, not a voice, whispers, low and indistinct, but unmistakable. From all around me, I wasn't alone, and I couldn't leave. It was like the forest had come alive, like it had trapped me here, not just physically, but mentally. And I realized with a sickening clarity that whatever was here, whatever had been watching me, it wasn't going to let me go. The whispers grew louder. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, but it felt as though they were closing in on me from all sides. Not a single word was clear, but the tone was unmistakable. It was not friendly. It was not comforting. The hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, to run, to escape this hellish place. But I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey me. My breath was coming in shallow gasps, and my thoughts were scrambling, twisting in circles. I knew I had to leave. But every time I turned, every time I tried to push through the brush, I found myself right back in the clearing. It was as if the ground itself was shifting, pulling me back to the center. I looked up at the sky. It was getting darker, faster than it should have. The sun, which had been hanging high in the sky, was now a dim red disk, disappearing behind thick clouds that seemed to form from nowhere. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The whispers fell silent. The air, once thick with tension, cleared. The suffocating weight lifted. The trail was back. The trees were normal again. The sky was light. It was like I had never been there, like none of it had happened. But I knew it had. I knew what I had felt, what I had seen, and what had followed me. I had been marked. I didn't waste a moment. I didn't care where I was anymore. I just needed to get out. I made my way back to the main trail as fast as my legs would carry me, barely stopping to catch my breath. But no matter how far I walked, no matter how quickly I moved, the feeling never left me. I could still hear the whispers in the back of my mind, and I knew that whatever had followed me, whatever had been watching me in that forest, it hadn't gone away. It had simply retreated. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. Maybe it was the forest playing tricks on me. Maybe it was something far worse, something I'll never fully understand. But one thing is certain. That hike, the one I thought would be just another solo journey in the wilderness, it was the last one I'll ever take. So, to anyone listening, anyone thinking about setting foot in the wild, in the deep places where the trees grow thick and the silence is complete, be careful. Because sometimes the wilderness isn't just a place. Sometimes it's a trap. And once it's set, there's no escape. As for me, I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from that experience. The memory of it is like a shadow, always just out of reach, always there, lurking. If you ever find yourself out there, far from the beaten path, alone, listen carefully, because what you hear might not just be the wind.